before the words "another car," there was the name Peugeot. It began in the early 1700s when Jean-Pierre Peugeot established a textile business in the Montbéliard region in eastern France. His sons developed and diversified the business into textile machinery and production of other steel items. By 1885, when the company began manufacturing bicycles, it employed over 500 people. Armand Peugeot, one of the sons of the sons, became enamored with the concept of horseless carriages, and in 1889 produced a three-wheeler steam-powered tricycle which he exhibited at the Paris Universal Exposition that year. In 1891, he combined with Gottlieb Daimler to produce a petrol-engined quadricycle, at a time when only one other petrol-engined car had been produced in the world. So reliable was this first Peugeot that it followed the Paris-Brent-Paris bicycle race of that year. 1,200 kilometres without a breakdown. An amazing feat at that time. This marked the start of a history of Peugeot cars which reads like the history of the car itself. In 1895, the world's first station wagon was a Peugeot. In 1900, engineers at Peugeot had an idea for making it easier to start your car. They called it battery ignition. The same year, Peugeot produced a car with front-wheel drive. The world's first compact was also a Peugeot, the charming Babe of 1911. A decade later, Peugeot produced the world's first diesel engine light enough for use in a car. Henry Ford introduced his Model A to an ecstatic world in 1927, but he'd been beaten by 3 years. Peugeot had already introduced the world's first nimble-seat roadster, the Cabriolet, in 1924. In 1930, the Peugeot 201 became the world's first volume car with independent front suspension. And so the history goes on. It was inevitable that this single-minded dedication to development and reliability would lead to racing victories. In 1894, about the time Parisians were discovering the Can-Can, a Peugeot vis-à-vis won its first motorsport event. It was a 125-kilometre reliability trial from Paris to Rouen. Next year, a Peugeot won the world's first motorsport race from Paris to Bordeaux and back. In 1912, with a design which revolutionized motorsport, Peugeot won the French Grand Prix. A victory repeated again the following year. In 1916, Peugeot driver Dario Resto won the Indianapolis 500 at the incredible speed of 84 miles an hour, a feat eclipsed in 1919 when Peugeot again won the 500 at a speed of 88 miles per hour. Again and again, since that time, Peugeots have proved their reliability in Europe and around the world. In the 1976 Bandama Rally, 50 cars started, 8 finished, and the first 5 were all Peugeots. In March 1978, Peugeot became the first car maker in history to win the grueling East African Safari Rally 6 times. Peugeot has also proved its reliability closer to home. In 1953, the manufacturer of a fuel additive called Redex decided to sponsor an Australian reliability trial. And it would be the longest trial staged since the New York to Paris trial of 1908. It would be over 6,500 miles, or 10,458 kilometres. Now, driving around Australia in the early 50s was a pretty frightening thing to contemplate. It was totally inconceivable that anyone could drive a standard motor car around Australia. A trip from Sydney to Brisbane or Melbourne was a 2-day expedition, and a trip to the outback was unknown. There were gaps of perhaps 1,000 kilometres between fuel points and 2,000 kilometres between mechanics. The dangers were kangaroos, water buffalo, black mud and bull dust. And yet on August 30th, 1953, 192 cars took off from Sydney. There were custom lines and Vanguards, Plymouths, Consols, Zephyrs and Chevrolets, Humbers, Citroens, and 11 Peugeot 203s. Nobody took much notice of the Peugeots. The car was funny, little, and French, in an era when everybody knew that the big Humbers and Plymouths and custom lines were the cars to watch. One Peugeot, car number 48, was crewed by Ken Tubman and John Marshall. They entered the Redex for a bit of a lark. In fact, the only preparation was to give their Peugeot a valve grind, a lube. They threw in a few spares and packed a dozen bottles of beer and a dozen bottles of wine given to them by Tubman's local in Maitland. They would travel to Brisbane, Bundaberg, Mackay and Townsville, then across to Mount Isa and Darwin, then Tennant Creek, Alice Springs, down to Kingunya, to Adelaide, to Melbourne, Albury and home to Sydney. Competitors lost 1 point for every minute late or early, 100 points for refusing to obey an official instruction, and 500 points for replacing component parts during the trial. And it wasn't long before just about every car began incurring points. By the Hawkesbury River, 32 miles out of Sydney, a Jaguar broke an axle. At Glen Innes, police booked 5 competitors for speeding. At Townsville, the field was down to 177 cars. By Mount Isa, all but 42 cars had lost points. It looked like a wreckers yard of abandoned luggage, tyres and broken parts. Cars arrived at Mount Isa with suspension bound up with fencing wire and mulga roots, windscreen smashed and roof racks just snapped off. The casualties included wallabies, wild donkeys, brumbies and kangaroos, cattle, goats, buffaloes and wild pigs, of course. By Thursday, September 10th, the thousands of spectators in Adelaide could only count 11 cars who had not dropped points. Tired, beaten crews were now abandoning their cars or selling them to the locals to get the train ticket home. Fourth into Adelaide was cheerful Maitland chemist Ken Tubman, who quipped at the time, "We in the car could go round and round Australia until they all fall out." The Peugeot had only minor dirty fuel trouble, 4 punctures and a bit of damage from a collision with a wild pig. Sydney, September 12th, 1953. As the cars wheeled into Sydney, one car was acclaimed. Peugeot. Ken Tubman and John Marshall in the Peugeot 203, car number 48, had won. But just as important, every one of the 11 original Peugeots that started finished that grueling trial. And Peugeot wasn't a funny little French car anymore. It was a car as tough as Australia. And so was the new Peugeot, the much acclaimed luxury Peugeot 505. That's the history of Peugeot, one of Europe's most famous names. Now on the other side of this tape, I'll talk technical. I'll lead you through the functions and controls of the Peugeot 505. To select first or second, my name is John Crawford, and I want to welcome you to the new 1982 model Peugeot 505. While you settle down and make yourself comfortable in the magnificent seats, I'd like to tell you about the controls and the features of the new 505. Comfortable? If you need a little more legroom, just lift the bar under the front seat and you'll find that the seat glides smoothly backwards and forwards on nylon wheels. If you'd like to adjust the rake of your seat, you'll find a lever on the right-hand side of the driver's seat, or the left-hand side if you're the passenger. Just lift this lever and the squab can be adjusted to your preferred position. You'll note that inertia reel seat belts are fitted front and rear, and that the front seat belt anchor point is integrated into the front seat so that the belt remains correctly and securely tensioned at all times. Now that you've settled in, let's start by working across the dashboard from right to left. On the driver's door, you'll see an external rear view mirror controlled by a double knob. The inside knob moves the mirror up and down. The outside knob moves it left to right and vice versa. This system allows quick and easy adjustment of the mirror from inside the car. Near the door, on the dash, you'll find the first of the 4 dash air vents. Note that this vent can be pulled forward in its mounting. The movable levers providing precise control of the airflow. Beneath this vent, you'll see a round knob. This hydraulically adjusts the headlight beams up or down. For example, you may wish to lower your main beams to see more clearly in a foggy situation, or if you're carrying a heavy load in the rear. Ahead of the ignition switch, you'll have noticed an orange light which came on when the door opened. This light illuminates the ignition switch at night. It's handy if you have the interior light switched off. This light also lets you know if a door is open. Ahead of the ignition switch, on the lower side of the dashboard, is a knurled wheel. This wheel controls the brightness of the instrument lighting, bright in the city or dimmed for less eye strain while you're driving at night in the country. The twin cabin lights, one in the front above the windscreen and one in the rear, operate simultaneously from both front and rear doors. To operate them, you simply move the lens housing. The housing has 3 positions: forward for permanent off, a middle position for permanent on, and a rear position to operate automatically from the doors. The cushioned steering wheel is cleverly designed with 2 downward spokes to ensure the best possible view of the instrument cluster. On either side of it, you'll find a multi-function control stalk. Let's examine the right-hand stalk first. This controls the windscreen washers and wipers. Note the symbols on the end. Facing you should be a single circle. This is the normal wipe mode. To start it, just press the stalk in towards the center of the steering wheel with the tip of your finger. To stop it, press again. Now rotate the stalk downwards. Facing you will be a single dotted circle. This controls the intermittent wipe mode. To start it or stop it, just press the stalk like you did with a normal wipe. If you rotate upwards, this will return you to the normal position. And if you twist upwards once more, you'll now see 2 circles on the stalk. This is the fast wipe setting, and the same pressing action starts and stops the wipers. This stalk also controls the windscreen wash, and you operate this by pulling the stalk down. This stalk also controls the wash wipe, and you can operate this simply by pulling it towards you. It'll work in any of the 3 wipe positions and will work for as long as you hold it. When the lever is released, the wipers will continue for 4 wipes after the washers have stopped. Now let's move to the left-hand stalk, with its 2 arrows and symbolic headlight. This stalk operates the trafficators, headlight flasher, the lights, and the horn. To operate the self-cancelling trafficators, simply move the stalk up or down to turn right or left respectively. You'll notice the appropriate green directional light flashing on the top of the instrument panel. Press the end of the stalk in and you'll sound the horn. Twist the stalk upwards once and you'll find a bulb motif with radial lines coming from it. Your parking lights are now on. You'll notice this is also indicated by a green light with the same motif on the left-hand side of the instrument panel. Twist the stalk once more and you come to 2 symbolic headlights. Now you're on main beam, and this is also indicated by a similar green light on the dash. Now pull the stalk towards you and you're on high beam, confirmed by a blue light on the dash. Pull the stalk once more and you're back to main beam. By the way, when the stalk is pulled back to you, the headlights will flash whatever mode the controller's in. Now onto the instrument panel itself. The petrol gauge on the left-hand side needs no explanation. The temperature gauge to the left of the fuel gauge shows the engine operating temperature. If for some reason the car should overheat, the needle will move into the red sector and the temperature warning light on the top right-hand side of the instrument panel will come on. If this happens, stop the car and let the motor cool down before attempting to rectify the problem. Beneath the temperature light is the oil pressure warning light, which comes on when the ignition is switched on and should go off when the engine is started. If not, or if this light comes on whilst the engine is on, this means the oil pressure is low. You should immediately stop the car and check the oil level. Beneath the oil pressure light is the central emergency warning light, which indicates stop. This light acts in parallel with the water temperature, oil pressure, brake safety, and battery charge lights, and warns of any major system malfunction. Below the central emergency warning light is the brake warning light. That's activated if brake fluid is low or if brake pad wear is excessive. The final warning light in this cluster is the battery charge indicator. Adjacent to these warning lights is the tachometer, and incorporated into this is a fuel econoscope. This consists of 3 lights operated by a vacuum sensor. The green light on the left-hand side shows the most economic throttle settings. The middle yellow light shows average consumption, whilst the orange light on the right-hand side shows when fuel consumption is excessive, such as under hard acceleration. Next to the tachometer, in the middle of the instrument cluster, is the speedometer. This incorporates an odometer which can be used to record trip mileage. To reset the odometer to 0, simply push the protruding button. Now let's move on to the heating and ventilation controls. They're located on the console in the center of the dash. Starting from the right, the first lever selects the flow of air. For demisting, set to the small figure at the top. For warm air throughout the cabin of the car, pull the lever down to the figure beneath. For a pleasant drive on a normal day, with warm air at your feet and cool, fresh air at your face, select the figure in the middle, with the blue line pointing at its head. For general air conditioning, move the lever to the figure with the single green snowflake. For extreme conditions requiring air conditioning, move the lever to the figure with 2 green snowflakes. This means the car will recycle the internal cabin air. This setting is useful if you want to lower the temperature quickly when the car has been sitting in the sun or in periods of excess humidity. The figure by itself is for recirculating the air in normal conditions. The next lever controls the temperature of the fresh air. Red indicating hotter, blue indicating colder. The third lever, from right to left, the one with the 2 snowflakes, controls the temperature of the air from the air conditioning system. The coldest setting is with the lever at the top, and the least cold setting at the bottom. We recommend that when the coldest temperature is selected, a fan speed of at least 3 should be used. To maintain the air conditioner in peak operating efficiency, it should be used for 5 minutes at least once a week, even in winter. The final lever on the left controls the 5-speed fan, which sucks air into the cabin. If you're traveling faster than 50 kilometers an hour, you can leave it on the 0 setting. In between the 4 ventilation control levers is a flap. Pull this forward from the top and you'll find the ashtray. On the top right-hand side of the ashtray is the heated rear window switch. Just press it in to switch on. Note, it illuminates. And press once again for off. On the top left-hand side of the ashtray is the hazard warning light switch. This is operated in the same fashion as the heated rear window switch. The cigar lighter is located on the right-hand side of the center console, below the radio cassette. The AM/FM radio stereo cassette player fitted to the Peugeot 505 represents the latest in car sound technology. To switch the radio on, simply press the left-hand knob in. The cassette player starts automatically whenever a cassette is inserted into the loading slot. This left-hand knob also controls tone and volume, and if pulled out, the balance between the twin front speakers. To the top left of the cassette loading slot is the tape eject lever, and to the top right, the fast forward and rewind lever. The knob on the far right-hand side controls the tuning and band selection. The touch-sensitive buttons enable up to 5 AM and 10 FM stations to be pre-programmed via the memory button. Now, if you look down to the gear lever on the center console, you'll find 2 switches. These control the front electrically operated windows. Between these switches is a clever little rack to hold coins for parking meters or toll booths. Apart from looking after the driver, the Peugeot also caters for passengers. As well as a huge boot, 18.4 cubic feet, there are storage bins in both front doors, magazine pockets behind each of the front seats, and a huge lockable glove box. If you look inside, you'll find it's divided into two sections, the smaller of which is ideal for storing cassettes. The bonnet release handle is inside the glove box on the top left-hand side. Pull this towards you and you release the bonnet locks in the front. There's a further safety latch on the bonnet which has to be released from outside before the bonnet will open fully. If your car is a manual, just a few comments about the gear change. It sits naturally in the third and fourth plane. That is, if you move it forward or backward, it will move into third or fourth. To select first or second, you must move it to the left, and to select fifth or reverse, to the right. The gear change pattern is also clearly marked on the top of the gear change lever. If your car is an automatic, then to select the appropriate gear, rest your hand on top of the T-bar and squeeze the underside. This will enable the lever to be moved to select the gear you want. A 1.5 second delay is built into the selection of reverse, and you should allow this time to elapse before applying power with the accelerator. In the center of the dashboard, behind the two center vents, is a digital clock. Now, check the keys. You'll find there are two. The key with the black plastic shroud operates the ignition and both front doors. The second key locks the glove box and the boot. So you can leave your ignition key in the car, say at a parking station, whilst securing your valuables separately. The new Peugeot 505 is also fitted with a central door locking system. This works simultaneously to lock or unlock all four doors and the fuel filler flap whenever the key is operated in either front door or when the inner control of the driver's front door is used. The rear doors are naturally fitted with a child-proofed safety latch so that they cannot be opened from inside when the latch is activated. There you have it, a brief rundown on the controls and the features of the new Peugeot 505. This tape is not meant to be a substitute for your driver's handbook, and if you require further information, you should refer to the handbook or to your nearest dealer. The Peugeot 505 has been hailed as one of the great cars, coming as it does from a manufacturer with Peugeot's history and tradition. This is not surprising. Look after your car properly, and it will reward you with many years of safe, reliable, and economical motoring pleasure. Now that I've shown you all of the controls and features of this Peugeot 505, on the other side of this tape, we'll go back to the beginnings of Peugeot in the early 18th century.